will not bow down.
Let my people go.
We will not bow down.
Let my people go.
We will not bow down.
Let my people go.
We will not bow down.
Let my people go.
We will not.
Hello and welcome to episode 29 of the Croydon Constitutionalist podcast, bringing classical liberalism to South London and beyond via our YouTube channel and wherever you get your podcasts. My name is Dan Heaton and my partner in podcasting today is Mike Swadling, the co-founder of the Croydon Constitutionalists. Mike, how are you coping with the COVID lockdown?
Well, the weather definitely brightens up the week for coping. It's good to see more people out and about generally, and more local businesses opening up. I've not made use of the dog groomers that's opened since I don't have a dog, and I've been using the clippers on my own hair. But it's good to see the world, even rather tentatively, start to return to normal. How are you finding it, Dan?
Well, I still haven't had a shave since the lockdown kicked off, so I think I may need to pop along to that dog groomers shortly. So you'll have to give me the address, and it sounds like a good recommendation. So what have we got to discuss today, anyway?
So COVID-19, and particularly some talking around borders today. The Brexit Trade Talks, which are underway in some ways and another. The Lib Dem Leadership contest, yes, you heard that right. There is still a party called the Lib Dems. Croydon Council and its financial troubles, which should be a worry to all local residents. And things to do to stay busy.
Well, yes, the COVID lockdown continues, but as you say, there have been some easing of restrictions, and there are more people seemingly out and about, and a few more places have opened up. Hopefully, that trend will continue. But yes, whilst we've all been in lockdown, people have still been joining us here in this country. But the Home Secretary Priti Patel has announced that I think it's from June the 8th, with a few exceptions, most notably lorry drivers and the such, will have to face a mandatory 14 days quarantine when they enter the country. Sounds like a splendid idea. Not quite sure why we haven't been doing this since day one. I'm not sure why, if I have to stay in all the time, why people are coming to this country, willy-nilly don't have to face a 14-day quarantine. Mike, any idea why it's taken so long to do this?
There's a broader issue here, really, of the government not taking the borders very seriously, and we might come on to talk about some of that. But they're more readily imposing restrictions on British citizens than they are on foreign citizens. I don't know whether that's because the Home Office machinery is so anti-British and pro-immigration. I don't know whether that's the government just had too much other things to work on, but it doesn't feel like putting the citizens of this country first, which pretty sure is what they're elected to do. There's no justifiable reason for it to have taken this long. Incidentally, I was due to be in Rome this weekend. Rome looking awfully like Causton at the moment. Obviously, a 14-day quarantine coming back for 3 days away wouldn't be that viable. So I understand why they've done it. I've understood why they did it earlier. I'm not so sure I understand why they're doing it now. And it does seem rather a death now to any chance for a tourist industry getting up and running again this year.
Certainly. I mean, how long this is the planning to have this in place for, who knows? But certainly, if it's in place for a few months, it's obviously going to put the kibosh on, as you say, the travel industry, people coming into the UK for a holiday or a break, but also for ourselves, perhaps going to sunnier climes. Because if we go to Spain or Greece or somewhere for a couple of weeks, we'll have to take another 2 weeks off work to get over it, literally, because we'd be in quarantine. So it'll be interesting to see how this works and for how long it goes on. But yeah, it did seem as if the that the government had was giving a preference to foreigners over their own people, which is not particularly good. And speaking of foreigners, Nigel Farage has identified some issues with the channel. There's been talk, obviously, there's been migrant camps in Calais and in other parts of the French coast. This has been known. We know that people are trying to get across from the war-torn France. They would have you believe. Nigel Farage has found them. He went out on a boat and he has videoed the French Navy seemingly escorting large dinghies, well overladen with people coming over to England. And it almost looks from the video as if the French Navy have escorted them to the middle of the channel, and then the British Navy, the Royal Navy or the Coast Guard, whoever it is, have spotted them and have escorted them across to England. Yeah, not great on border controls, is it, Mike?
No, not at all. These are not, let's be abundantly clear, they're not refugees. They're not fleeing from anything. France is not some ravaged, war-torn country. France is a decent place. I like to make jokes about them, but you know, it's a fabulous country. They might not like it there and want to come here, but that doesn't give them the right. They're not asylum seekers. They're economic migrants. And I'm in favour of pretty low levels of economic migration into this country, and you know, I've still on that platform. I think good people can be in favour of very large numbers. The government that's won the last few elections has done it on a manifesto of in the tens of thousands, so let's say 100,000 net migration a year. Whether you want a million or you want none, surely we can all agree that whatever number it is, people should come into this country via an airport, via immigration control, with a passport. We can screen out the drug dealers and the rapists and the murderers. We can check them for drug running and gun running and anything else. We can surely all agree that coming over in a dinghy and running from the cops when you hit the beach isn't the way we want to have a method of immigration. It's interesting, a lot of people online don't think that they can agree that. It doesn't speak well to their character.
No, shocking stuff. Well, there's talk of the schools going back in June with the staggered attendance for the youngest in primary school and I think the eldest in primary school, perhaps to get them up to speed and to get them up to speed with ready to go to secondary school. But whilst Labour previously had been in favour of trying to keep the schools open, it seems that they're now coming under pressure from the trade unions, obviously in this case the teaching unions. Sounds like the teachers are not too keen to go back to work. Mike, you were recently interviewed by Sputnik Radio on this issue. How did that go?
Yes, so it's interesting that Sputnik Radio caught me rather by surprise in a question about PPE in classrooms. And I struggle to see how PPE gets used in classroom. And it caught me slightly by surprise. I'm a governor at a couple of schools and I haven't really had a conversation about it. And normally these things will come up and there's various guidance sent to us. And if I had read it, it hadn't triggered with me and made me think, oh, you know, what's going on there. And I just struggle to see how you work with you've got a crying 7-year-old and you're telling them to stay 2 meters away from you, or for that matter, you know, how you stop a 7-year-old laughing at you as you put on your mask and gloves to tell them off or whatever it might be. These are children. They will act like children, and it's interesting, as Say was asked about. Now, as a governor, I should say, you follow the government advice. You're a bit like a civil servant. You're there to implement rules that are set and make sure they're implemented inside the school you're looking after. Teachers going back, it's a tricky one how we're going to do this. I think most schools will open. I think there's a lot of bluster being talked about by unions. But I think they might not fully open. So it's years reception, year 1 and year 6 going back. They're talking about maximum numbers of pupils per classroom. For some smaller secondary schools, if you've got reception year 1 back, it's actually you start to fill up the classes. Plus you've got, say, maybe some key worker children in there. If you're limited in numbers on a class, you really do struggle. you may not have the staff available because they're having to isolate for various reasons or maybe ill. And so what I think we'll see is a lot of schools go back around about the 1st of June or a little bit later. They might go back 2 or 3 days a week rather than full time. And generally, I sense teachers are trying to do that. The teaching unions, of course, are avidly against education from what I can see. I thought for years the biggest problem teachers faced was the NUT Easter Conference. They're now called the National Education Union, but they are and they are pulling their Labour lackeys into line to try and stop any teaching going on, make teachers look bad. I do feel the teaching service in this country is let down by their unions time and time again.
Well, finally on COVID, if we can try to move on from this, we've got some merriment from up in Scotland. The Scottish government have basically passed a law to say that while 16-year-olds are allowed to vote in Scottish local elections, and indeed they of course were allowed to vote in the Scottish independence referendum because of that, anyone between the ages of 16 and 18 will not face any fine whatsoever, even if they break the lockdown provisions which have been brought in by the Scottish government. Doesn't really make much sense, does it, Mike?
No, I don't know about you. I'm my general sense is that you shouldn't lower the age of voting, but it's one of those issues I struggle to care very much about. I remember as a 16-year-old feeling slightly annoyed at the fact that I could pay tax but not do other things. And my general thought is you should align the age of maturity. So if it's 16, you can vote at 16, you can sign contracts, you can drink, you can drive, but you can also go to adult prison, be held accountable for contracts, pay your taxes, pay for your education, so on and so forth. And if it's 21, all of those things happen at 21. And you maybe want to allow people to do some things a bit younger because they will just do them. Drinking, driving are things that sort of spring to mind there. But yeah, I just a complete lack of consistency and it's, I don't know, it's just rank hypocrisy from the Scottish nationalists, but that just feels like they're raison d'etre at the moment.
Indeed. Well, let's move on, shall we, from COVID for a little bit at least, and let's move on to the latest on the Brexit trade talks. Some interesting developments this week in that David Frost, the chief negotiator for the UK government, has published the UK's draft agreement. This agreement's already been with the European Union for some time, but we weren't privy to it, and it's now been published. And as a part of publishing that to the world, he's included a letter that he sent recently to Michel Barnier. Has to be said, some cutting parts in that letter. Basically, in the letter, David Frost suggests that the European Union are requesting unprecedented provisions in a range of areas as a precondition for agreement, such as the fishing scenario, where they expect to be able to access our fishing waters as they did under the Common Fisheries Policy. Also, the EU is not seemingly prepared to replicate provisions that it has in other free trade agreements, such as mutual recognition, whether that be for car parts or financial services. And also the EU seems to be seeking to have the European Court make decisions over whether Britain is abiding by various provisions of any agreement, in particular in relation to state aid. So it's not a separate arbitration panel, it's the EU Court itself. Pretty damning indictment at the moment from Mr. Frost on the EU's position. Mike, what do you take from it?
There's no point trying to deal with someone that thinks you're just you're not an equal partner. I almost said I tried to look for the way the EU treats us, and all of the words I could come up with were not suitable for a family podcast like this. They don't think we're an equal partner. you can't negotiate with someone that doesn't think you're an equal partner. All they're going to do is try and bully you. Your only choice is to walk away. I don't know, Dan. Any thoughts on why Mrs May and Gavin Barwell and that lot didn't get that feeling and come to their senses? What, almost 2 years ago now?
Well, the previous withdrawal agreement essentially said, well, okay, if we can't come to an agreement, we essentially are going to bind ourselves to not being able to walk away. And that was the situation with the UK-wide backstop. So they seem to want to be bound, as it were. Nobody knows better than the former member of Parliament for Croydon Central as to what he was thinking at the time. But no doubt he'll write another book about how to lose a marginal seat, having written one about how to win a marginal seat, and hopefully he'll come clean on what his thinking was on the issue. But as to what people's thinking is on a certain issue in relation to Brexit, there seems to be some confusion over the Labour Party's official position as to whether or not to extend the transition period. Keir Starmer has seemingly flip-flopped on it a couple of times, and now Rachel Reeves, who is and I can't remember the full phrase here because it's not the shadow Brexit secretary or anything like that anymore. It's basically the opposite number to Michael Gove. She's seemingly now saying that there should just be an extension, that unless we can agree a trade deal, that there should definitely be an extension because we must not crash out. Mike, we've heard that expression before about not crashing out. When will Labour come to their senses on this? They've just lost so many seats up north. When will they get their heads around this?
There's some sort of mathematical formula here, I think, that every year that they're banging on about Brexit past the 2016 vote is another 6 months added on to the point they finally come to their senses. I think they will finally come to their senses that they will not be able to win an election. That's not to say after that they would win an election, but it means they absolutely couldn't. So it's been 4 years now. So there's at least, if they change their policy tomorrow, they couldn't win an election for at least 2 years because no one would take them seriously. You know, there's that kind of thing. So there's part of me that sort of thinks, well, why not just carry on for as long as you can, guys, and hopefully we'll never see your party in power again. But it's unbelievable. Just this lack of willingness to accept the facts on the ground. They can't change anything. Why not just, criticise some of the approach of Boris's government by all means, but to be an anti-Brexit party when you're not going to get what you want, when you're just isolating your opponents your possible voters further, it just seems absolutely crazy. But it's not surprising, is it? I mean, we published an article a month or so back now when the shadow cabinet was formed, and all bar one of them are Remoaners. They're not Remainers. They're not people that wanted to stay and accept democracy. They all were people that have complained about the democratic outcome. I can't see them really changing their tune anytime soon.
No. Well, speaking of people who are unlikely to win elections for some time and who don't seem to want to change their tune, the Liberal Democrats have announced that they're going to finally have their leadership contest. It was going to take place earlier in the year, but was postponed due to the COVID-19 situation. They've finally announced a timetable for it. It's going to start in July, late July, and then they're going to have, even though we're talking about late July, they're going to have online hustings and online voting with a new leader announced towards the end of August, ahead of they're going to have a virtual conference this year. Unlike Labour, who at the moment have decided to cancel their conference, whether they have something else later is another matter. So far, there had only been one person who'd put their hand up, and that was the world's first ever pansexual, as far as I know, Layla Moran. Some talk of Ed Davey, who's the current interim leader. He possibly standing, but he hasn't announced that yet. But we have a competitor for Layla Moran. We have a lady by the name of Vera Hobhouse. I think that's Vera in German. because she does in fact originate from Germany, and she's the Member of Parliament for Bath, having first been elected in 2017 and been re-elected in 2019. So I thought, well, who is this woman? So I had a little look on her campaign website, which was launched a couple of days ago. And wouldn't you know it? She's campaigning overtly to rejoin the European Union. If she's leader of the Lib Dems, they will campaign to rejoin the European Union. They will also campaign for proportional representation. And they will have a policy of seeking out electoral pacts with other progressive parties. Do you see any future for the Lib Dems, Mike?
Um, I I looked at her campaign site, and there was something here about building a winning alliance that can defeat Conservative MPs at the next general election. I've had a feeling now from the Lib Dems I know and have interacted with that they're a party looking for a purpose. And the purpose they've found at the moment, because PR's gone, Europe's gone, they were a big local democracy and devolution party, but I don't think they've made any waves in either area anytime recently. The only purpose they found is to be anti the Tories because they're so anti-Brexit. That's all she's come across at. Well, we've already got an opposition. I don't think people will get behind you because of how much you dislike someone. They'll get behind you because of what you stand for and what you propose to do. She's perfect summing up of the Lib Dems at the moment. Going back to Leila Moran for a moment, I remembered that she'd come out as pansexual, and I didn't particularly know what that was, so I looked her up and looked on Wikipedia, and it mentioned, so pansexual people are open to relationships with people who do or do not identify strictly as men or women, and pansexuality therefore rejects the gender binary, and that's why she's not bisexual apparently. Just going on about her, because then I looked at her a bit. Now she's not responsible for how she grew up, but her father was a diplomat for the EU. She grew up in various countries. She attended private schools in Brussels, Kingston, Jamaica, and Roden School in Brighton. And she's obviously clever because she read physics at Imperial College London. But when you look up her details, she doesn't speak of woman of the people. They either of them will be well suited to the Lib Dems and well suited to minority party politics.
Indeed. Well, let's watch the comedy unfold. Now, speaking of something close to home, Croydon Council look like they're in some serious trouble. Reports are coming out that there's going to be an emergency meeting between various auditors and the chief executive there. That will be the chief executive that we have commented previously upon her high salary. Croydon Council is currently believed to be £1.5 billion in debt, and there is a real possibility of a Section 114 order being placed on the council, which essentially bans any new expenditure being made by the council, except for those things that are statutory obligations. Looks like we're going to get a council tax rise and some serious cuts to public services, Mike.
Yes, a significant council tax rise, no doubt. Major cuts to important services that service needs of people in the borough. Hopefully they manage to cut some of the unimportant services. Worth bearing in mind, Croydon Council is £1.5 billion in debt, yet managed to find £59,000 to pay for Croydon Pride last year. Managed to find a total of £754,000 for the Cultural Growth Fund, and that's the payments over 500. There's possibly more than that. Another £160,000 for Box Park, £5,000 for managed to spend down the pub at the Oval Tavern. There's a litany of expenses like that that they were racking up whilst Rome was burning. It appears at Croydon Council. Shocking mismanagement by them. You mentioned salaries there. Dan, I don't know if you can remember how many people were earning over 100 grand when we were campaigning back up with the Taxpayers Alliance a couple of years ago.
I want to say it was 19.
Yeah, well, that was last year. Yeah, that's right. And now it's up to 23. So again, whilst racking up these debts, they've managed to employ 4 more people or take people over the 100 grand. And one of the things we were campaigning for back then was that no one earned more than the Prime Minister. Well, the 3 that earned more than the Prime Minister, had they capped those salaries in some way, that would have saved them £155,000 a year. Now, 155,000 against a 1.5 billion pound debt isn't massive, but you've got to start somewhere. That's how businesses save money. That's how people save money, is you cut back on some of your small items of expenditure, and you don't buy a shopping centre or a hotel shortly before a global pandemic. Not Croydon Council, it appears.
Well, yes, this hasn't just been a case of tax and spend. It's been a case of some very interesting investments and some property speculation. What did they do? They bought the freehold of a hotel. They've done something similar, I think, with a shopping centre on the outskirts of Croydon. And all these things are going on whilst our main shopping centre in the centre of Croydon has been let to go to rack and ruin, because the development that's been talked about for a long time hasn't taken place, and so businesses have been moving out because the place has been let to just fall apart, essentially, because they're not spending money on maintaining the building, because why would you? You're going to tear most of it down and rebuild it, but the tearing down and rebuilding hasn't occurred yet. And if people are going to be concerned about being in crowds, and are perhaps more familiar now and more comfortable with ordering stuff online, because hey, they've had to be over the last couple of months, it doesn't bode well for the main shopping centre in Croydon, and for which was just not just a shopping centre, but was a whole sort of redevelopment and regeneration project for the centre of Croydon. So not looking good for the town at the moment, is it, Mike?
No, it's not. The Labour Council has, frankly, just fouled in a lot of ways. These purchasing of property with the Colonnade Shopping Centre and the Croydon Park Hotel's leasehold, it's property speculation. They've borrowed at a low rate. They expect to be able to make money at a better rate. I can see the sense in it. That we've written before about the risks of that and the problems of it. It creates a situation where the council has a vested interest in planning permission, for instance, that is meant to be neutral on. Well, that's not a good thing. Brick by brick is exactly that as well. And up and down the borough, there's been huge cries of anger at some of the brick by brick proposals. If a private business were investing in property at the moment, were investing in commercial property, it would be in a bad place. It would no doubt lose, many of its staff would lose their jobs, rather sadly. Many of the investors would lose their money, rather sadly, not particularly as those investors would often be pension funds and the like. But taxpayers and basic public services might be affected by a lower tax take, but wouldn't lose their shirts in the process. Croydon Council has created a situation where we will lose our shirts because of their forays into the private property market. Who could have seen it coming? Quite a lot of people, really. You don't know there's going to be a global pandemic, but you do know there will be a downturn. And you do know that whenever government invests in private enterprise, it goes wrong. Again, Croydon Council couldn't seemingly see that.
Well, yes, and obviously there's the effect for council taxpayers in the short and indeed potentially medium and long term. But what are going to be the political ramifications of this if this does actually come to pass? Well, interestingly, the Croydon North MP Steve Reed, safe Labour seat, Croydon North, for many years now, he's currently the Shadow Secretary of State for Communities and Local Government. So I'm sure he's going to be very interested in what's been going on at Croydon Council, where his fellow Labour Party members have been running the show for some time now. And of course, we've had the postponed GLA elections this year, so they'll be taking place next May. And the candidate for the Croydon and Sutton constituency is none other than Patsy Cummings, the councillor in Croydon, who is the deputy cabinet member for finance. So there'll be some interesting political fallout from this, I think, over the next year or so. But also, this is going on at the same time that we've got the Democ campaign, which I know, Mike, you've been involved with to a great extent. This is the campaign for a democratically elected mayor for Croydon. So this person would be elected by all of the people of Croydon, not simply the person who is the leader of the council, who, because they are a councillor and their party has a majority on the council and they are put forward as a leader of the council. So there could be some interesting ramifications there when that campaign gets back up and running. Once the COVID crisis is over, and we move forward, hopefully with a referendum on whether or not to have a mayor, and then there would then subsequently be a vote. You can well see that referendum will be going the way of selecting for a democratically elected mayor to be put in place to clear out the council. Mike, you've been involved in that campaign. How do you think this situation is going to affect that campaign?
I think it just reinforces the need for accountability in the council. I don't believe anyone in Croydon voted for the council to go bankrupt, for us to pay more tax, for us to see services cut. Now, the council hasn't gone bankrupt yet. I need to caution against saying that exactly, but clearly there is some significant financial difficulties if even half of what we're seeing is accurate. And it is accurate that they are, well over £1 billion in debt. It's going to have an implication for them. It's interesting. Steve Reed was interviewed by the Local Government Chronicle recently, and to quote them, he indicated he is in favour of devolution to local government, including potentially rolling out the mayoral combined authority model in rural as well as urban areas. Although he mentions that it shouldn't be imposed, it should be up to the local areas. Well, that's exactly what Democ's looking to do. I don't see Steve Reed running to the aid of Tony Newman, and it's interesting that he's made this point in his shadow cabinet role. Democ, the need to change the way Croydon Council is run could not be more evident than it is at the moment. Democ is the only show in town to do that.
Yes, interesting times. Well, Mike, obviously we're all a bit locked up, not quite as locked up as we were recently, but Mike, we've got some interesting stuff on our website that people can view to pass the time. Why don't you tell the listeners about that?
Yes, so mentioned earlier, I was on Sputnik Radio. You can listen to the interview. It's a few minutes long. Pick up the link from the website. I talk about schools, as mentioned, and the government's general handling of the lockdown. We've also got a really interesting interview with Fernando Sobrinho, I'm sure I've got that wrong, of Partido Libertario, or the Libertarian Party of Portugal. Now, that's a new party that's trying to get formal recognition in Portugal. There's a process to go through in Portugal for that. They're set up. They're the Libertarian Party, much like our own, much like the US's one, and indeed like the one in Germany that we spoke about recently. Interesting stuff about politics in Portugal, how they're set up, what their views are on various things. In a couple of quotes from it, our taxation system is a total nightmare, being very progressive on income and achieving effective tax rates bigger than 50% if one's household is making more than euro 40,000 a year. So what would that be? About £36,000 a year if your household's making that, you're at 50% tax. I think that would cause us some great problems here. Another interesting quote I found there was public employees in Portugal have privileges that are not granted to the general population. I wonder if they work for Croydon Council. Reduced workload, bigger salaries for low qualified people, special health protection, etc. So yeah, interesting just to hear about politics in Portugal and how they're trying to campaign out there.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, it's very interesting to hear from these sort of parties on the continent. Particularly interesting to hear from Portugal, of course, because Portugal was a dictatorship up until the 1970s. Pretty similar situation to the way that Spain was. So I think there's perhaps some hangover from those days, perhaps in the government sector there. Well, if you'd like to write for our website or have any stories you'd like us to cover, please do get in contact with us. You can contact us via Twitter at Croydon Const. You can contact us via our Facebook page, or you can contact us via our website, croydonconstitutionalist.uk, or via email, croydonconstitutionalists@gmail.com. Well, if you'd like to subscribe to the podcast, that would be great. We've had some great listening figures over the past few weeks, so thank you for that. Do please subscribe and do please leave a review. Those are always welcome, and it helps other people to find the podcast. Please also subscribe to our YouTube channel. Obviously, at the moment, we're pretty much only able to use a YouTube channel for publishing our podcasts. But when we're back up and running as an actual campaigning group, we will have videos from our events up on there. And if you do go over to the YouTube page, you'll see some videos and some audio from prior events. As we said before, please do get in touch if you'd like to write for the website, or if there's anything you'd like us to talk about, perhaps on the podcast, or if you'd like to be a guest on the podcast. Always good to have people on board. But until next time, thank you for listening, and it's a goodbye from me.
And it's goodbye from me.
Stay safe, everybody.